everybody. Welcome to an even colder shop. As you can tell, I'm quite bundled up in here. My thermostat tells me it's 40 degrees inside, and I've got a propane heater and 3 electric heaters all going at once just to get it there, but we're close enough to make it at least somewhat decent. This is kind of like an unscheduled video, but I thought I might do it because this is very much like a FYI type of thing. I get asked pretty often by friends of mine who aren't car people about engine maintenance. Things like, how often should I get my oil change? Do I need to get this service done? Do I have to get that service done? And that makes total sense because if you're not a car person, something like this engine could be a pretty scary thing. It's scary because there's literally thousands of parts that are all within this. And I say thousands because you have to think about washers, nuts, bolts, every little thing. There's so much. And if you don't understand these dang things, it's scary business. And it could be expensive. But here's something that's definitely worth mentioning. And I want to show you the insides of a couple of engines to help show you some just simple, important things about maintaining your car. One of the most popular questions I'm asked is, how often do I change the oil in my cars? And as you can tell by this bin, oil is pretty important. Also, oil filters are pretty important. Something that I always do with my cars is I always go for OEM filters. These are for the Cresta and these are for our Rabbits. I always have a couple in stock. Actually, here's some for a Jeep. I always have a couple in stock because your oil filter and your oil changes are some of the most important things you can do to keep your car healthy and happy for miles to come. So let me show you an engine that we bought, gosh, it's gotta be 3 years ago. This engine came out of a wrecked Volkswagen Jetta, and when it came out, it had 200,000 miles on the engine. Now, I bought this up as a spare engine for us to be able to have for the Track Rabbit back when we were extensively endurance racing it. The whole idea being, if we blow up an engine, we'll pop this sucker in, life is good. But then you might think, it's got 200,000 miles, it must be junk. Well, let me show you something. So this is the same exact engine that we just looked at that's on the engine stand. It's called an 07K. It's in almost every Volkswagen Rabbit, Jetta, Passat made in the mid-2000s up to the 2010s. What's cool about these engines, it's a 5-cylinder. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cylinders. Those are where the spark plugs go in. This is your intake side, and this is your exhaust side of the engine. What that means, air comes in here, it gets blown up with fuel in the engine, and then exhaust expels all the exhaust out the back end. But I want you to see inside this engine. Do you see this copper color? That copper color is very much what you want to see. Now, you will notice a little bit of oil that's burnt inside the engine, but not much. This is a good, strong engine. Now let me show you the engine that's in our green car. Keep in mind, this engine will be fine. What we're going to do is treat it with a flush that's going to clean off a lot of the stuff that you're going to see in the engine. But look at this. Notice how orange the sides of the engine are here. What you're seeing is what happens when you don't change your oil often enough, and the quality of the oil that you use isn't good. You see how burnt and orange that is? That is not what you want. Let me show you something else which is somewhat damning of the previous owner of the green car. Now, I don't mean Russ. Russ only bought that car and had it for a short period of time. The previous owner was actually a mechanic. And also let this video be a lesson. If ever you see a car being sold by a mechanic, run. This right here is a new spark plug. I'm sure you've seen one before. This is a very basic plug, nothing special about it. We bought it because it's already pre-gapped to what we need in this car. Most important thing though is look here, the very tip of the spark plug. This right here is where electricity opens, and this is what actually starts, let's say, the fire, so to speak, or the ignition in the actual engine block. Without this being a clean spark, your engine won't be able to ignite the fuel and air to make any combustion. So this, although a cheap $4 or $5 part, is very important to making your car work. Here are the spark plugs that came out of the green Rabbit. Notice, covered in oil. And if you look, that black, that's soot, that means it's not a clean burn. Look at all the condensation and nastiness at the end of that spark plug. This cylinder was not happy. You also see how wet the spark plug is? It's because the valve cover gasket was leaking oil. Here's the most important thing to note though. You notice how it says VW, AG, NGK? These, I believe, are the original spark plugs. This is a 15-year-old car with 130,000 miles, which really isn't that much. This is less than 10,000 miles a year, 13, 11, whatever. It's not a lot of mileage per year. This should be a really clean engine if you think about it by the numbers, and it isn't, because the previous mechanic who owned the car did hardly anything to service and maintain this car. Here's the valve cover that sits on the engine. This goes over top. You can see on this one, we have a brand new valve cover, new gasket, and you notice how clean that seam is? That's because it's a very well serviced, nice engine. This is the best engine we probably have in the fleet. It's the one that came out of the Track Rabbit, hence the sticker on it. And we're gonna save this for now. More on that later. But for the sake of this video, notice this, there's supposed to be a rubber gasket. Look here, this is the rubber gasket that sits in the valve cover itself. And it's never been replaced on this car. So there's actual chunks of it stuck here that I physically can't get out. It's become plastic. And so what that means is that when oil is bouncing up against it on the inside of the car, it's then being sent back down those spark plug holes here, and then saturating the spark plugs with oil. That oil then gets onto the spark plug and fouls it. And that's why these things look so nasty. So then your next logical question should be, well, how expensive are these parts? Why would the mechanic not want to replace them? They must be crazy expensive. Well, what if I told you a set of spark plugs in this car costs about $30 and the valve cover gasket costs $20. Furthermore, everything that I'm doing on this car right now, under normal circumstances with a well-maintained engine, it'll take not even an hour to change the valve cover gasket, spark plugs, get it all new. And if we exchange the coil packs, that would be called a tune-up. So if ever you wanted to know what a tune-up is, it's changing your spark plugs and your spark plug leads. They're called ignition wires. Most cars nowadays have coil packs. So if you do a tune-up, you might get a change of coil packs. The reality is if coil packs work, you never change them. They just go forever. But further evidence of this car not really being maintained, What I'm about to show you is a pipe. It's a PCV pipe. Basically what it does is it redirects pressure within the engine to keep everything happy and healthy. Well, it just snaps in half. And it's probably been broken for some time, but the plastic is so brittle. And I think a big part of that is because so much oil is beginning in the top of this engine that it's just making these rubber plastic items so hard that they just break. And here's the reality, guys. Things like a tune-up, things like changing your valve cover, this is some pretty basic maintenance. And I know that for me, it's something that's easy for me to understand. I know, half of my week and half of my weekends I'm here in the shop. But for those of you who don't know about car maintenance, here's some top tips. Your dealer or whoever sold you your new or used car has probably told you this little white lie that you should change your oil every 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, even 10,000 miles. Do not do that. That is a recipe to have an engine like the one in this green car. Here's why. Different kinds of oils have different specifications, weight and viscosity. Essentially, a lot goes into the engineering of oil, but when we work on race engines, you might see something like 10 weight 50 going into most engines. Older cars like the Rabbits have 5 weight 30. This is pretty typical of engines built in the 2000s and 2010s. But new cars increasingly have incredibly thin oil. 0 weight 20, I've even seen 0 weight 10. And you might think that would just be for small engines, but what if I told you that my Jeep runs on 0 weight 20 as well? What this tells you is that the actual thickness, the actual texture of the oil nowadays is incredibly thin. And if you let that oil sit in your car for 9,000 miles at a time, it's going to burn up. It's simply not thick enough to last that long. Why is it that then your company, your General Motors, your Ford, your Honda, your Toyota, your whomever, is telling you that you can wait longer and longer to get oil changes? Well, it's perceived reliability, it's perceived durability, it's perceived value. Essentially, you as the consumer may think that the longer you wait for an oil, the better or higher the quality an engine, a car you may own. This is simply false. Basically, a bunch of marketers in the not so distant past figured out that when customers who don't know better about maintaining their cars think that they can go longer distances between oil changes, well, they think their car is better. And it's just not the case. So what is it that I'm trying to tell you now, this probably 15-minute video? Change your oil every 6 months or every 5,000 miles, and do not go beyond those distances. I typically change the oil in all of our cars every 4,000 miles. And that might seem like tinfoil hat thinking, but if you want your car to last like this engine that came out of the Jetta did with 200,000 miles, then what you ought to do is invest, pay that extra amount to get more frequent oil changes, and always make sure that when you get oil changes done, that they use the correct kind of oil. If your car requires full synthetic, to get full synthetic and do not get a blend. And make sure that you keep up with things like your tune-ups, make sure your gaskets get replaced, change your filters. These things make a huge difference in the longevity of your car. It can make the difference between owning your car 5, 7, 10 years down the road. Now, this is obviously a very different kind of video than what we normally do. If you like this, please let me know, because what we can do is more Dan the Car Guy-esque videos where I can teach you about the basics of keeping your car up and making sure that your car lasts for many miles and many years to come. I hope you're having an awesome night. By the way, this is the night that Pittsburgh is probably losing to the Buffalo Bills. So if you wanted to know why I'm in the garage right now you know why. So I guess go Buffalo. Bye for now.